Hey guys, this is on protein. It's sort of a bit of an overview that I'm going to do with this video. I'm not going to really show much sciencey stuff or anything like that. Just basically covering a lot of points in regards to protein. There's a lot of people just talking all sorts of stuff out there, academics and many others, YouTubers and whatever else talking about they can only take in so much protein or too much will turn into sugar or this will happen or that will happen or all sorts of bizarre nonsense and whatever else. Now, this is just basically a general overview that I'm going to do, and the purpose of this is to basically just hammer certain points and clear up a bit of confusion. Obviously, through this year, I do intend to do a series, like I've got my myths and falsehoods of veganism and many other sort of series and playlists specifically targeting certain subject matters like cancer or other things. This one will be on protein. I think protein for a very long time, in particular animal protein, look the stuff behind there, that sort of stuff, has been demonized quite a bit, and a lot of nonsense has been written about it. A lot of the type of research that's been looked at by many academics is, you know, either piss poor or pretty much so confounded and so problematic, you could basically run a truck through it. That's how bad it is. But unfortunately, that's how what we've got to deal with. And a lot of people are constantly, being fear-mongered when it comes to protein. And this is why a lot of people have problems on the carnivore diet with electrolytes, with all sorts of issues, because they're not eating enough protein. It's simple as that. If you're not eating enough muscle meat, you're not going to get enough methionine. If you don't get enough methionine, you're not going to produce enough taurine. If you're not eating enough of the flesh of the animal, and you're more focused on eating more fat and less protein, like a lot of people out there, you're going to end up having problems in terms of being able to manage your electrolytes and being able to manage a lot of the internal homeostatic requirements throughout the body. Taurine plays a very important role in so many. I've covered a lot of things. There's a lot to cover. I could do, there's an entire playlist, and there's going to be a whole raft of videos this year that will cover a whole lot of other neat little tricks that little molecule does in the body. But that's for another day. Now the focus on protein. If we're not getting enough protein, we cannot basically build the body. It's not only the focus on, protein synthesis. A lot of people say, well, you only need a certain amount for protein synthesis. True. But you need a hell of a lot more protein for a whole lot of other things as well. Most people don't realize about nearly half the protein that you consume doesn't even go to protein synthesis or any other thing. It goes to a couple of organs. The entire digestive tract, because that turns over quite often. Mucosal layers are rebuilt, and that thin lining has to be reconstructed every couple of days. Well, what do you think that's made of? Protein, my dears, protein. You know, everybody's focused and bizarrely focused on just, I need protein for my muscles. I'm getting too much. It's going to turn into sugar, the rest of it. Oh, my God almighty. This is reductionist thinking. Unfortunately, a lot of people are what I call specialist centric. What does that mean? That means they're focused on their field. Let's say they're doing physiology, like sports physiology. They can't see anything beyond that. Nothing beyond that. This is what happens when you take an education system, you degrade it in many ways, then specialize it where people just don't talk with each other. You have this separation, and you end up with a lot of reductionist nonsense. That's what we've got, unfortunately. Unlike yours truly, that likes to be more holistic and consider all the implications of what we take in and what role they play. Now, most people don't even understand that there are two, not one, two things that we need to basically focus on when we're talking about protein. One is bioavailability. That is, how much can you get from the specific food? Most of us know quite clearly that we've been either in a paleo, low carb, keto community for many years. We know quite well that things like whey, like dairy, like eggs and stuff like that have pretty much 100% bioavailability. That means everything is taken up. With meat, it's slightly less, just slightly, but still in the high 90s. And everything else is quite low. And we know that. We're quite clear about the bioavailability. And we know the reason why is because you've got protease inhibitors in plants that are inhibiting the breakdown of proteins into amino acids and preventing the absorption of sufficient amino acids from those plants. And so most of it gets pooped out the other end. Got it? And that is why, and you have to, and because plants have also very low amounts of protein, unless you actually have an isolate, like a pea isolate or whatever, something like that, you're going to absorb bugger all. And even those pea isolates and soy isolates and whatever else, even they have some of the anti-nutrients because the production process doesn't eliminate all of those things. It tries to eliminate most things, but still there are things in there, a few nasties. But, just because you can actually get a processed food, which tends to be also slightly higher in deuterium, but it is used for structural material. It's not used to produce energy unless you're actually consuming sugar, and then it may happen, if you're not providing sufficient energy and you're doing too much excessive exercise. Or remember the guy who was eating all the lean meat, Dr. Shivas, the guy that he was talking about that I made a video. I'll stick it somewhere up here, my critique on that. Why was that? The person was too lean, didn't have enough body fat, wasn't eating enough, animal fat. What happens? You can't build muscle because most of it's going to sugar. Most of it's going to provide fuel in terms of to produce ATP because you've got insufficient, too lean. That's why certain blood markers, I won't discuss it because I'll put the video for there, whoever wants to see it. And so that can also happen. That means that can impede your, the amount of what you get. And so when people say, oh, protein can turn to sugar, yeah, well, if you're too lean or you're on a mixed diet, so you're getting a lot of carbohydrates, primarily carbohydrate centric, lean meats, low fat, eating primarily, like a lot of these athletes do. They tell them to take all these sugar, sort of supplements and stuff like that when they're doing, exercise, specifically aerobics and stuff like that. What happens? They thin out. They lose a lot of their muscle mass. Why? Because they're just burning through so much muscle mass because they're not eating sufficient. You just can't get enough. They end up skinny fat. And when they get off aerobics and all that, what happens? They bloat out and become fat as. You've seen all these ex-athletes that were basically carb-centric. They were suppressing the ability to access fat. They were suppressing hormone-sensitive lipase. So when insulin's too high, what happens? Hormone-sensitive lipase goes down. You can't access body fat as efficiently. So what are you going to do? You're going to basically convert anything and everything. And if you don't eat protein to convert it, lean protein to convert into sugar, what are you going to do? You're going to basically start wasting away your own muscles, your musculoskeletal. So when those academics say, oh, they're actually talking about a carb-centric model, they're correct. I don't disagree with them. Yeah, if you're not eating enough sugar, even basically, academics all the way back, far, far back into 1930s. Kempner. I've done a video on him, covering him. I did it with Pim Johnson, Bart's partner. And I covered that about the low-fat diet. You don't engage the Randall cycle and all that, and why he only recommended a certain period of time because it's very catabolic, and why he whipped. I'm not kidding you. Back then, they could get away with a lot of things. He whipped his clients to make sure they were consuming enough sugar. He gave them raw sugar to get enough sugar so they wouldn't catabolize their own muscles. That's the problem. That's why the vegans end up emaciated unless they're eating junk food, and being on a vegan standard diet and then fattening up like the rest of the population, which is pretty much 70% plant-based anyway. So that is the problem that people don't understand, that if you can't access body fat or you're not putting enough fat into your mouth, you know what you're going to do? You are going to convert that to sugar. But if you are, you're not, because it's demand-driven. When we say it's demand-driven, if you're cutting out the fat source, well, what is the body going to do? It's going to upregulate, gluconeogenesis. That's what happened to that guy, that lean guy. There was any protein, lean protein, couldn't put muscle on, and saying, what the hell's going on? And his gluconeogenic markers were going up. The liver enzymes that are related to gluconeogenesis were going up. Nothing else. There was nothing problematic, as he even admitted himself. Guy was too lean. It was obvious. Oh, he had insulin suppression, all these other nonsense that he's come up with. Again, reductionist thinking, you end up cracking crackpot hypotheses when it's quite simple. You're not engaging the Randall cycle. You're only providing one specific source that can be converted to a fuel. Well, what the hell do you think is going to happen? Gluconeogenesis is going to be upregulated. That's what happens. But if you've got access to fat, it won't. Okay? And when half of the protein we consume goes to the liver, the pancreas, and the enteric system, your digestive tract from your mouth to your anus, obviously you don't need as much for protein synthesis now, do you? And what about all the peptides that you're producing? What about all the enzymes you're producing? What do they need? Fairy dust? No, they need protein as well. So when you look at the overall picture, and also you have to have the right combination of amino acids in order to achieve protein synthesis. This is where the utilization comes up. That's that second pillar. Everybody talks about bioavailability. Utilization is very important. That's the second point that I'll bloody make. Meat, 32%. Whey, all these other isolates and whatever, around about 17 or sub 17%. You can get the picture. It has to do with the combination of the amino acids. That is why also things like the essential amino acids and branched chain amino acids will be rapidly taken up. So the utilization is very rapid in the system and will be used as building blocks. If you had like a pure combination of the exact requirements, you would have massive amounts going towards, that single thing. That's why I go, I'm not concerned, because, about half of it is going for those processes, for those collagen structures. And then the other is going for the musculoskeletal, 32% from meat, 50 odd from eggs. And what's left over, the other percentage, is really going to provide some demand-driven gluconeogenesis, and the rest for enzymes, polypeptides, and stuff like that are transcripted in the endoplasmic reticulum primarily. That's really of every single cell. That's really what's happening. Others will get into the brain area and be utilized in a number of different ways. So that is really what is going on. So when we talk about protein synthesis, you'll get from different things. We're talking about the utilization, the utilization part. Okay, that's what we're talking about. And so, you know, that's a different discussion altogether. And this is where the problem lies, that a lot of people don't not understanding that sort of difference. So the utilization is an important factor. What's left over goes to all these other functions. And so there is, this whole myth about excess protein is just bullshit. Absolute bullshit in that regard. Now, let's look at, let me just share my screen for a sec. This is the only stuff that I will be showing in this video, because it's supposed to be me ranting and nothing else. But I just need to make this point, and then I'll continue my rants as usual. Okay. Okay. Now, anyway, it's not doing it. I'm going to have to increase. So this will make more sense. Oops. Slightly reduce it so the damn thing can fit in. As you can see, amino acid absorption rate, blood amino acid concentration, branched chain amino acids and essential amino acids, or essential, those essential amino acids, as you can see, rapidly absorbed, and then they drop off quite fast. So you're getting close to baseline within about three hours. It's pretty much about 2 hours where most of it's actually been absorbed at that stage. Whey is a bit longer, about 2.5 hours, give or take, getting to these lower levels. Casein doesn't really peak; it sort of flatlines. This is why I always say after take casein later on, and it just continues that slow provision of amino acids in that regard. So I like casein after training, in that regard. So this is if you're doing a lot of bodybuilding and stuff like that. Meat, as you can see, meat slowly comes up because it takes a long time to digest. It's the same thing with casein. Casein, and that's why dairy as well takes a long bloody time to digest, and then it starts getting into the system. And as you can see, even after everything, mostly about 4 hours has gone completely to baseline. 5 hours, casein is still hasn't gone to baseline, which is down here, as you can see, and neither is meat. And meat can go all the way up to 6 to 8 hours, depending on how much you've eaten. That is why when you eat meat, you feel really full. You've had enough meat. And it takes a long time to absorb and slowly gets broken down and slowly gets released and gets absorbed primarily the middle part of the small intestine. That's what's supposed to happen. This is why a species-appropriate diet, rather than powders and stuff like that, gets absorbed over a number of hours. And so you can have a 1 or 2 meals a day, quite a lot, and still get sufficient protein coming in small amounts and all that, and getting utilised for protein synthesis and whatever else you need in that regard. So, that's the way we naturally would have consumed protein as meat, which means it doesn't spike into the bloodstream as high. And that's why I like casein as a supplement more than actually whey. And I would use less whey, more for that spike of protein synthesis, and I would add more casein for that, the prolonged release and provision of basically casein and amino acids in the system for enhancing and supporting, longer turnover and synthesis. So it's not a matter of, whether you have a big one meal or multiple small meals, as some people argue, or whatever, in the end of the day, it's going to take hours and hours for the absorption that's going to happen. And that hours and hours of absorption that is happening, at the end of the day, it's not going to make much difference. I mean, they've done actually a number of tests, and that doesn't make much difference when you actually just do pure protein. When you start adding fats and sugars and whatever else, then you're actually affecting the endocrine system. You're affecting the hormonal system. That is what changes the dynamics. What I was saying earlier, if you're basically, glucocentric for your primary fuel for ATP production, well, what do you think is going to happen when you can't access body fat and you run out? Well, the body's going to tap into that bolus and it's going to upregulate gluconeogenesis. Again, it's demand driven, but it's going to upregulate it and use it for sugar, more of it. It's going to use more of it because you are not providing enough energy, in the form of, mass fuel and energy or generating energy in the form of ATP, because the mass fuel that you're providing is the wrong type. It's not fat, it's sugar. So you're going to have slightly elevated insulin. And if you have slightly elevated insulin, you're going to slightly inhibit. To what degree you'll inhibit hormone-sensitive lipase and affect the access of fat from your own adipocytes, from your fat cells, will depend on the amount of sugar you're putting down your throat. Got it? These academics are, because they are so sugar-centric, they say, well, they see it again in a reductionist way, and they'll say, oh, you only need this amount for protein synthesis. If you use extra, it will turn into sugar. Well, obviously, if you can't access body fat, what do you think's going to happen? You're going to upregulate gluconeogenesis. You'll use more of it for sugar. Simple as that. But if you don't, and you provide sufficient fat, exogenous or endogenous, because you're keeping insulin under control, because you're not spiking yourself with sugar, contraindicated stuff, then you're not going to have this problem. So that is a consequence of being a reductionist thinking viewed from the perspective of a carb-centric model, not a low-carb model. Doesn't apply to us carnivores or to anybody in the low-carb community. This is why even, Steve Finney and Volker, who have done actual experiments, and they have athletes who are in labs, controlled conditions, exercising flat out and doing low carb and all that, and they don't lose muscle mass. They utilize fat far more efficiently from their own adipocytes, from their own fat cells. They don't have this problem. Gluconeogenesis doesn't go massively up like we saw with the guy, the Shivas guy, who didn't have enough fat, exogenous or internal. Got it? Because he was too lean, and he was eating lean meats all the time. That was his problem. Robert, I don't know how you missed it, mate. I got no idea, but you did miss it. You really have to get out of that reductionist mode of thinking, which a lot of people unfortunately have. So this is the reality about, you have to think holistically, guys. You've got hormones that are interplaying together with what you're taking in and what you've got on your body. All these things are interplaying, and the body is sensing and going, okay, I've got enough body fat, but insulin's high. Okay, can't really utilize that. So I can convert these things to sugar. I'll take a few of these aminos and turn them into sugar. That's what it does. Oh, insulin's a bit on the lower side. I can access body fat. Well, let's utilize it. Let's build a bit more muscle. Remember the old steak and eggs guys in the past? They used to be bulking up on that. They were back in the old days, in the 30s and 40s and all that. There were no steroids, there were no nothing. They were bulking up and they were quite physically big. guys that could really lift whole things. I mean, one of them died in his 70s lifting a washing machine, and this is the old days where they were very heavy, up a staircase and actually flattened him, you know. So you can build a lot of muscle if you're not basically utilizing that for the wrong reason. You've got to get out of your mindset this whole notion. I mean, I've done experiments on myself where I've pretty much just eliminated all cheats, all carbs, no alcohol, no nothing, and no exercise, and just really hammering in the protein until I was hating it. Do you know what? I was still building muscle. I was still building muscle, and I was checking myself to see whether my blood sugar would spike because the demand wasn't there. I wasn't pushing demand, but I was still forcing protein synthesis with leucine in the system. And the rest was used for other purposes. I look at my father by enhancing and all that. In about 2 days, he'll be 89 and got hit by a car, thrown 3 meters or so. Well, no broken bones. I wonder how that happened. Yeah, it's something called protein, key academics out there. Unfortunately, if you don't eat enough of it, and he was, consuming quite a bit of protein, but also I had him on protein because he initially wasn't eating enough meat. Now he's eating far more, but back then he wasn't. So I had to provide him with a protein concentrate, not an isolate, but a concentrate from. It was basically a grass-fed beef concentrate. So I gave him that, which was much easier as a powder to consume, and it was grass-fed. So as far as deuterium goes, and a lot of the other nasties, it was much better quality. So he was having that. It was an Australian product. And on top of that, I was, spiking it slightly with leucine. So I was doing, about 6 grams of leucine, 3 with each meal, plus whatever was getting a couple of grams, about pretty much the same amount, nearly 2.6 or whatever per serving. So I was having about 2 servings. So all up, about 5.6 approximately, plus or minus. Taurine in there because of taurine binds to mTOR, in particular within the actual skeletal, the bones. I do have a hypothesis on that. I think the reason for that is because it is an osmolyte and regulates all the ions, and because bones are mineralized collagen, it seems to basically help in enhancing mineralization of the bones. And there is studies. I've actually covered on the periphery in terms of taurine and mineralization, but there will be a bit more stuff in the future that I will cover a bit more comprehensively in that regard. And so by combining heaps of protein with taurine, I was able to enhance protein synthesis and actually getting stronger bones. So I wasn't concerned. And my father's got kidney cancer, remember? But last time when we checked, when he was in the hospital, when the Jabba the Hutt incident, and I was blaming potentially the cancer causing the clots, and that was the last jab that he took. But anyway, what happened? Well, his cancer had halved. Now he will die with that cancer because it's extremely slow growing. But the thing that shocked me was that it was half, or to be more precise, it shocked the doctors. I thought that he was on the right path because he seemed to be better. He was telling me he was functioning, urinating better and stuff like that. Everything seemed to be improving on that front. So the kidneys were slightly larger, so less atrophy. Plus, and this is the other thing, that extra protein is also required by organs. Remember, your phase one, primarily phase one, of your detox pathways, those enzymatic steps that are part of phase one, they require amino acids. Oh, I wonder where we get those damn things. Oh, that bloody meat again. You know, so you've got to wake up to yourselves, guys. You don't need meat just for fucking protein synthesis. You need meat for a whole lot of other things. Detoxification, you need amino acids. To repair tissue, you need amino acids. To transcript enzymes and polypeptides, you need amino acids. To do a number of functions in the body, you need amino acids. To build healthier organs, you need amino acids. The protein synthesis for the musculoskeletal, that 32 to 50 odd % that you get utilization, that's good enough. You don't need shitloads. You don't even use all that, I can tell you. You know, most of it goes to all these other things. As I said, the liver, the pancreas, and the enteric system, they pretty much use more than, I think it's 50, plus or minus 52% or whatever. I can't remember now off the top of my head. But so, you know, you're not using it just to basically build those. Got it? You're using it for a whole lot of purposes in the body. And we need to realize that. So when we're not having a sufficient, what are we doing? We're inhibiting a whole lot of other things. We're affecting the transcription of important enzymes, the transcription of important polypeptides, their transcription. You know, we need to transport minerals or transport this or that. Well, these peptides that are actually synthesized, well, what do you think they do, all these proteins? Well, they have a whole lot of roles in the body, moving things around. Well, if you don't have enough amino acids, you can't build them. It's like, well, you know, yeah, I can't send you that Amazon thing. You know, not enough trucks available. Well, it's the same thing. So protein, we have to get it out of our heads. It is not just for protein synthesis. It has a whole raft of roles in the body, you know, from detoxifying, from being utilized by systems which are required to cleanse the cells inside. Important components that are required for reparative purposes throughout all the cells, plus the mitochondria and other organelles. So, or the immune system as well. So if you don't have enough certain amino acids, the immune system doesn't work as well. And if you get an illness or whatever, you deplete. Remember the Maasai, what did they say? When their elderly get sick, we feed them more meat because you need the stuff. Got it? They don't do it because, you know, they've seen the anecdotes. They don't need, I need high quality research. You need your head examined. You know, these guys, and I'll put the video for the Maasai as well up there, these guys have worked it out over thousands of years, and they know quite well. If you want to heal, you eat more meat. They don't fear meat like us Westerners, well, not only Westerners, but many Easterners as well. What I would say, the so-called civilized world, which we've dumbed ourselves down to such a level that we basically fear the stuff that is actually important for our health. Stop fearing protein, guys, and stop listening to crackpots out there who just talk nonsense. You know, how much protein you need will vary. You know, when I'm sedentary, I do about 1.8, you know, approximately, plus or minus. When I'm a bit physically active, I move up to 2.2. Most of the time, I'm trying to do about 2 grams per kilo body weight. So that's sort of my target, which is about one per, I believe, one per pound, 1 gram per pound, you know. So that's what I target. Now, if you're doing far more physical work than I am, because I'm a bit lazy sometimes, well, then I usually recommend 3 odd grams. And if you're like at the peak, up there at the top, bodybuilding, like Jonathan and people like that, I usually recommend that when they're training heavily, 4 grams, because I know they are going to be utilizing shitloads of enzymes, shitloads of polypeptide transporters, because those muscles are going through a lot of work, need repair and all that. They need nutrients to be moved around, transport and all that. So you need far more material to do the work. Okay? It's like I brought all the stuff here, but I don't have enough workers to do it because I didn't have provisions for workers. Well, that's that extra amino acids. We'll build those workers, transcript them, as they say in scientific parlays, and then they will do that work. They'll use the building blocks to put things together, repair things, fix things, grow, build things up. That's that. Turn them over, break things down and build them up. It's what all these different things, and they all require proteins. They all require proteins, they require cholesterol, they require fats. This is why we say species appropriate foods are what is important. And this is why we actually see that insulin to glucagon, when you're eating a steak only diet, it's 1.3. Glucagon tempers down insulin, guaranteeing you'll access what? That adipose, that body fat, if you're not eating enough fat. Now, if you lean out too much and you're not eating, then you'll basically start utilising protein. And I don't like people utilising protein because it's higher in deuterium. Now, it's not as high as sugar. Sugar's, in the 150 plus, where proteins are usually within the 138 to 140 odd. Still lower than sugar, but still a problem, as far as I'm concerned. You should be in the safe zone between 100 and 130. That's the safe zone. And animal fats are smack in the middle between 113 or slightly less. If you're talking about fish, but we don't oxidize DHA, which is 102, but pretty much 120 odd when it comes to dairy. And sometimes certain types of dairy can be lower, especially, the ones that are higher in saturates. So you've got all that little plays a role. So that's the thing that you have to take into consideration. What is my fuel mix? That will tell me what the consequences, what's going to happen to that protein. So stop listening to carb-centric academics and carb-centric research that's based on somebody consuming a whole lot of sugar with that protein, and look at some of the stuff that Finney, Volker, people like that have done. That research is high quality because it's actually done in labs, locked in, and people are actually being biopsied every hour or two. That's high quality. You're locked in all day, you're doing certain things, and they're looking at utilization of different substrates, and they're actually biopsying the muscle to see exactly what's happening. Now, some athletes will put up with that sort of stuff because they want to get the high performance, which they're looking for, and obviously that level of intervention is really hard to do it with the general public. Nobody's going to go and volunteer to be in a study that they're going to have such invasive stuff done to them. And that's why it's hard to do this sort of research. And most of the carb-centric stuff is observational or epidemiological, or all that sort of stuff. It's claptrap, it's nonsense, it's irrelevant, it's useless in most cases. But it's the stuff that people always see this, even some academics behave like like damn vegan, rattling the pages in front of you, and you go, okay, have you had yourself examined recently? Is usually the reply that I want to verbalize, but out of, not trying to create too much animosity or whatever, I sort of suck in and sort of, but, that's how I feel with these sort of people, because it's just, they don't get it. In a in a low carb state, things work slightly differently. Simple as that. This is why LDLC goes up for everyone. The level that it goes up will vary between people. So with me, with ApoE, it doesn't go up as high, because, I've got chylomicron resident stay in the system for a bit longer. So it takes a bit longer for them to come into the liver and get re-exported out as VLDL and on from there. And that's sort of the difference of the ApoE, the hyperresponders and all that. I mean, Bart's been doing a bit of videos recently, which is pretty high quality stuff, and pointing out some of the, let's say, questionable research in a sense. I would use that comment that I don't think it is as well done. And Bart recently pointed out quite clearly, 135 grams is not low carb, guys. Definitely not low carb. Low carb, as Bart said, is 50 or less. And when we're talking about pure ketogenic, it's 25 or less, So when I was doing pure ketosis, I was on something like 15 to 20 grams, So, 135, God, that is not. And so people need to keep this in mind in that regard. Now, I have no problems if people, like for bodybuilding are bulking up and doing things like that. It's your body. What you do to it is your problem and all that. Where I do have a problem is when people argue from a position of ignorance when it comes to biochemistry and physiology, and then try and push a certain narrative, which is a carb-centric narrative. That's when I get, quite upset, because I know that people are basically using reductionist research, carb-centric reductionist research to basically make their argument. And that does not happen when you've got a situation where insulin is slightly tempered down due to glucagon in a low carb state. That insulin to glucagon ratio tempers down to 1.3. So you don't get that over amplification effect. But if you're eating quite a lot of sugar with those lean meats, you know what's going to happen? Well, your insulin is going to go much higher. How high? Depends on a lot of factors. How high? So a pure potato diet will give you an insulin to glucagon ratio of 4 to 1. Going to McDonald's and eating a lot of their crap, forget about the meat, that's probably the only healthy part in the McDonald's meal, but all the other stuff, the fructose stuff, the sugary stuff, the drinks and all that, you throw all that stuff in, the highly inflammatory seed oil cooked chips and all that sort of stuff, potato chips, all that sort of stuff in combination, depending on the actual meal and the amount and all that, and the person, you can actually get an insulin to glucagon ratio of 70, yes, 70 to 1, with glucagon in the complete toilet, with insulin so high you could forget about the door is literally sealed, like in Fort Knox, that level of sealing the adipocytes, the fat cells. They're sealed completely from anything coming out. Hormone sensitive lipase, you can't even see it. It's gone beyond the toilet, you know? So you've got to consider that sort of thing. And then people will say, oh, a lot of that is going to be utilized for sugar. Yeah, potentially. Potentially, yes. Because you can't access, if you run out of, a fuel called fat, well, what else are you going to use? And then you run out of a fuel called sugar, but your insulin is also so high suppressing hormone sensitive lipase. What are you going to use? This is what happens to the vegans. That's why they waste away, become, skeletal, you know, veganized skeletals. Yes. Vagoon skeletons. That's a nice one. That's exactly what happens. This is physiology, guys. It's not as if it's magical stuff. It's in the books of physiology. Anybody can read it. If you can get your mindset away from the reductionist thinking, you go, yeah. If on the other hand, I'm only consuming a small amount, then the insulin to glucagon ratio is going to be much lower. I can still access a certain amount of the fat cells, so I can get that mass of fuel out of those as triglycerides and into my cells, so I can actually produce ATP in the mitochondria. If I don't do that, and I can't access, and I haven't consumed enough, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to start utilizing, like that guy, Shivers's client, the lean protein that he was consuming. And if I am a bagoon and don't get enough protein, what is going to happen? Musculoskeletal. We've seen it. They only last for about 5 years on a pure vegoonerized diet because they waste away. And especially the fruitarians, oh God, do they waste away. They really waste away, I mean, Durian Wright understands. He's probably the one that, even though he claimed that he learned this from Ancel Keys, which was ridiculous because he didn't. Ancel Keys and many of the others learned it from Kempner, and he did the research. And even Kempner understood you couldn't do this for a long period of time for the simple reason that you would waste away. So you had to basically put in other foods to maintain your body. You got to, so you can actually, and that's why I say the honeymoon period is when you rapidly lose because you disengage the Randall cycle, rapidly lose, but then you sustain nutritional deficiencies and other problems. And so, okay, you can guzzle down, like Walter Kempner used to whip his clients, a whole of raw sugar to basically provide the energy so you can minimize the catabolism. But what you'll do is you'll be putting too much sugar into your system for too long a period of time. What happens to the proteins in the body? One, you've got the deuterium problem that you're going to damage your mitochondria. And the other component, you're going to be glycating heavily over many, many years, your protein structures. You only have to look at them after quite a number of years, how unhealthy their skin complexion is and many other things. Why? Overglycation. So while you can up the energy like Walter Kempner used to encourage with a bit of whip, maybe Durian likes that. I don't know. You'll have to ask him. But if you get enough, yeah, you can actually slow down. And if you take, like a lot of the modern people will take the protein supplements and, the protein isolates and stuff like that, you can provide and keep it going. But with real food, you can't. With plants, you can't. You end up like the fruitarians wasting away. But if you're, using the modern approach, which never existed before, that's why we don't have one single multi-generational veganerized vegan society anywhere on the planet. None exist. They would have died out, simple as that, if they did exist. In the modern world, you can do a lot of things. You can take steroids, which we know a lot of these characters have, including, the character that I just mentioned. He's mentioned it himself, Hench, as well, has done it. That's a British guy. Hench Herbivore, as he calls himself, Paul. Plenty of them that do it, steroids and a whole lot of these supplements and isolates and whatever else to try and keep going. So they sustain it for a number of years, but they do damage themselves quite a lot. And in the long run, they will sustain a lot of, nutritional deficiencies, heavy glycation, heavy deuterium damage. A lot of them end up getting cancer, because of the high deuterium destruction of the mitochondria, can't produce enough ATP. So you're pushing sort of fermentation, and we know where that leads. Most cells that start becoming less viable if they're not apoptotically taken out. That means you get a virus, a weakened immune system. The immune system isn't sufficiently strong to kill off cancer cells, the T lymphocytes, again, which require a lot of animal foods, and vitamin D, which requires also fat, because it's a fat-soluble vitamin. And so if you don't have enough vitamin D, you don't have enough taurine, which in the thymus does its little magic and all that, inactivation, and also it reduces immunosenescence. So when they go out there, those warrior T cells, to knock for 6 cancer cells and viruses and whatever else pathogens invade the body. If you don't have the species-appropriate diet to support those systems, you will succumb to disease in the long run. So, yeah, you can force yourself delusionally to continue something and say, oh, it's working for me. And I'm poking myself with all sorts of things and guzzling down all sorts of modern-day, Frankenstein concoctions that are made by industry. Yeah, you can, to some extent, but there will be consequences in the long run. And that's what these people don't understand. So, as I said earlier, protein isn't the problem. It's a lot of the reductionist thinking that has actually demonized both protein and fat over the last decades. In particular, the last 50 years, there's been a lot of demonization that's actually happened. So through the 80s onwards, it really took off and escalated. And today it's, bizarre, the sort of thinking. Foods that we've been consuming for most of our existence as a species. None of these diseases existed. Early part of the 20th century, macular degeneration, unknown. Cardiovascular disease, unknown. Cancer, very rare. And most likely, most of those were induced by viruses and anything else, and weakened immune system because of poor living conditions. But to a large extent, these things were either non-existent or very rare, historically. And we didn't have any of this processed garbage. But it's beyond the processed garbage. It is that we have shifted, since we've acquired refrigeration after the 50s, we were able to move away from the seasonality. Up until then, we were seasonal. So for most of the year, we had a couple of seasons. So spring, spring onions, the green stuff. Certain things of those were included, as garnishes, as, it wasn't the main food. It was a bit of, it was a side, it was side dish. Then through the, summer periods, the warmer periods, there were grains, tubers and stuff like that. Grains were mostly all year round to some extent, but not a large amount because they were expensive still. It's not. We haven't got to the modern era where we've got massive subsidies and massive production. We're still not there with a high level of automation and tractors and stuff like that. We've still got things that are very basic. Even up until then, it's really 60s onwards where things are getting more automated, more sophisticated, and productivity is going up. Before that, there were questions about whether people could get enough food, even in advanced developed countries, whether people were undernourished. There were questions even in the US. So, it was a completely different time. And then you've got the other thing is, you had seasonal fructose. And we know fructose helps to fatten up, and it's a key component on its own. We know that all animals use fructose. Bears, before they hibernate, those tropical fish in the Amazon twice a year. I've discussed this before. All those sort of things. That's how we lived. So what was the main foods that we were consuming most of the time? Dairy, meat and eggs and seafood. That was it. That was the majority. People in the past consumed 10 times the seafood we consume today and double, if not triple, the meat that we consume, depending on which part of the world. Eggs, massively more than we consume today. Probably not like that other geezer, that old geezer back in 90, in the early 90s, 91, I believe, 25 eggs on average a day, hard-boiled eggs, and he used to munch them all day. So a bit of an addiction to eggs. But, yeah, people still consumed more eggs, more dairy, and it was not these Frankenstein foods of dairy or Frankenstein foods of eggs or Frankenstein foods of meat and all that we have today. They were actually real, actual meat, real, actual dairy, real, actual eggs and real, actual seafood. So it was a different time and people had less disease. And the only people that were getting cardiovascular disease, even in that time, in the 50s or whatever, what happened through the Great Depression? The cost of animal fats and all that went up. And also, the so-called cleaner seed oils came in to the mix. And the introduction of the seed oils had rapidly taken place, especially in the upper middle class and middle class families, because they didn't like the smell of the animal fat. And so they replaced it because it was cleaner. That's how it was promoted to them. So who were the people that were first having the cardiovascular diseases in that era? The president, the upper middle class came from that sort of, and other wealthier people. So they were concerned. They wanted answers. And we had a crackpot like Ancel Keys give them the wrong answer because he was very close to the military-industrial complex that hired him and also to the food industry. We know that. He even made the K rations for the military. So he was well connected. So he was part of the deep state and pushed an agenda because, they've been pushing for a long time. But he left. He didn't stay to eat the stuff that he recommended that all Americans consume. He went to Italy. So a nice place there that we could actually consume, cured meats and stuff like that, that nasty cured processed meat. Awful stuff, apparently, according to Ancel Keys. But he was caught, eating the stuff in Italy, antipasto. God, how could you do it? Oh, it doesn't affect me as bad. And it's not the same. All these excuses. And I do consume a lot of olive oil that sort of is protective So he came up with a whole lot of nonsense. But anyway, that was Ancel Keys. He was a eel physiologist. He wasn't even a human physiologist. So he specialized in eels. He should have basically stayed there. He was a failed. He sort of in the Great Depression. He had was a qualified uh, economist. But he couldn't find a job as an economist. So his mate recommended that he goes and does any course. And he happened to go to Duke, do eel physiology. And the military came looking for somebody to make some rations for them. And the top academics, they couldn't be bothered doing it. They go, oh, just, we'll allocate this guy called Keys to basically do it for you, because it was beneath them, making rations for the military. That was beneath them. These were top academics, special people. So they gave it to him. Well, him being an opportunist that he was and a psychopath, basically made sure that he used that to network and get his own way and destroy all his opponents in his way. He was a bully. Most people called him a bully, and he was. And he was a nasty bully with a big ego and didn't really care about the consequences as long as he looked good. And unfortunately, he left a legacy that has been quite destructive to most societies around the world. Maybe the deep state exactly picked him because he could serve. It's being conspiratorial, Harry, isn't it? But with everything that we've seen, it would not surprise me at all in that regard. Now, boys and girls, I'm going to leave you there. There will be a follow-on series discussing all these things in greater detail and providing sort of proofings and how these mechanisms work inside the body and all that. But the takeaway message you have to remember is that protein is not just for protein synthesis. We use more than half of it for a whole lot of other functions, as I said. All the stuff that it has to do with digestion and detox, it's using more than half, let alone other functions in the body. So you can actually see that you're not using a lot for protein synthesis. So do you need more? I would say so. And if you're sick, you probably need even more, because you need to basically rebuild more immune cells. Well, what do you think that they're built from? Protein. So protein, fats, and cholesterol. So if you're not providing those animal foods, you're going to have problems being able to heal. Take a leaf out of the Maasai's, playbook, ancestral knowledge of supporting their elders when they get sick. What do? They feed them more meat. Feed yourself more meat if you want to have good, healthy, long life. And don't concern yourself about meat in any respect. I've seen the magic that it's done for my father, who's nearly 90, on a whole lot of fronts when it comes to his health. And I've seen it with other people as well, including myself, but many other people. You're not going to find the same results on any other stuff. Most people have tried veganerized nonsense and have tried the sad diet. Just take a look outside. It's a horrendous situation that's been created. Wake up, people, wake up. Protein has been demonized, and reductionist nonsense has basically made people misunderstand how much they need. And that's the biggest problem, because we're seeing an epidemic of sarcopenia and osteoporosis and all these things. Bones are mineralized collagen. Collagen requires amino acids. you know. Remember, 52 odd percent, most of it actually is going through the gut system. That's all collagen structures. Most of your body is screaming for protein. Biggest problem is people are not getting enough. See these tribal people, the Sand people, the Kalahari, who this is based on Lauren Cordain, and I've done a video. It's on Bart's Odyssey channel where I did it on pretty much cover that. So, and that's it. I'd have all the Odyssey videos that are done by Bart and myself. There's another video there that I'll stick here that actually has all the links. And what does that say? They are doing something like up to 4. But why are they doing 4? You go, these people are not bodybuilders. Why are they doing 4? Well, if you're in the Kalahari, which is a very harsh environment, and you're having to go long distances, carry things, you're really working your body to the max for hours. What do you think you're going to be doing? You're going to be tearing down tissue. It's a completely different ballgame from a Maasai who's just taking his animals out and all that. It's got his spears and that, make sure that no lion attacks them, and then comes back and grabs one of his goats because it's pastoral. He's not a hunter and gatherer. It's pastoral. Grabs a couple of his goats and actually cooks them up for the meal. The Sand people living out there, they're like the Hudsons. They have to go out and get it. And where the Hudsons are, there's more plentiful game. In the Kalahari Desert, there's less animals around. So if you're not out there going over long distances to find stuff and come back, and you're not robust enough, you need far more than other people. As I said, like the bodybuilders, the top-end bodybuilders, they're going to be, doing a lot of work. And so their requirements for protein is going to be much higher. So really important what you're doing. Are you healing? I need more. Immune system, rebuilding things, detoxifying. What do the Maasai men do for the elderly? They feed them more meat. Take a leaf out of that ancestral knowledge and apply it to your life and stop fearing protein. Anyway, that's it. See yous.